Hello, everyone. I'm glad you joined me today for this particular message. This is a continuation of my series, Getting Up, Going Up, the Psalms of Ascent. We'll be looking at priorities in our lives today, and I'll be talking to you from Psalm 127 and a little bit from Psalm 126. Priorities are one of the central things of our lives. And if you're in the business world, they'll talk about setting your priorities, reaching your goals, accomplishing what you desire, and all of that is on priorities. You've got to really want it in life. And in business, those are true. But there's another realm where priorities are central to our lives. And that area is in what we consider the most important things in life. Psalm 127 is a psalm written by Solomon. And he says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives his beloved sleep." That second verse is an important verse that I want to reflect on in just a few moments with you. But when we think about priorities in America, the things that are quite a bit of what would, if we were to build a pyramid of priorities, sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very pinnacle of that pyramid, the most important thing would be our survival or our ability to reach actualization, to feel like we have been a good person and accomplished important things in the world. Hopefully, second would be our family, but in many cases it's our health or our physical well-being. But it should be our family. The next thing is our success, our ability to accumulate things in the world, and our social connections, how we are looked at by other people in our society. The fourth thing that very often is a part of our hierarchy of need, our hierarchy of priorities, is our personal desires or aspirations. What do we want to accomplish? What do we want in our lives? What do we enjoy? And then kind of down at the bottom is our job. And if we are feeling fulfilled at our job, and if we're earning enough money at our job to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And those are kind of the things that we, particularly in America, would put as priorities. One of the things troubles me about all of those things. They are self-centered. They are focused on the self, on what is important to me. And as a Christian, that should not be the focus of my priorities. My priorities should not be about what is important to me or what is my self-desires. It should rather be what is God's desire and what is important to God. We struggle with priorities because we as human beings are quite self-centered thinkers. Solomon talked about this psalm early in his life, and he talks about priorities. He talks about building a building and talks about the fact that no matter how well you construct it, if God doesn't take care of it, it's not going to last. He also talks about no matter how good of a watchman you are, how careful you are over protecting the city or protecting those things under your care, unless God oversees them, you will lack that ability. Because God is the one who oversees what is important. I was watching on Saturday morning an apologist on video, and he pointed out something that I had not noticed in clarity, and that was that on the flight out of Afghanistan, of the over 600 Afghanis, the vast majority of the people on that aircraft were young men between the ages of 18 and 30. Those young men are of military age. They are strong and healthy and would supposedly be able to make a difference. A very small number of the people on that airplane were women and children. In comparison, he contrasted that with the sinking of the Titanic in the early part of the 20th century. As he compared the two, he said, on the sinking of the Titanic, most of the people who got off the Titanic, the vast majority of them, were women and children. They were placed on the lifeboats first. The population of people on the Titanic, the vast majority of them were men who were able-bodied. And yet, in comparison, very few of the men survived on the Titanic. They went down with the ship. The reason was that they felt like it was more important. They prioritized the lives of the women and the children ahead of their own lives. Real priorities are what we are willing not only to live for, but what we are willing to die for. Those things that are the most important in our lives. Christians are told that we are not the most important person in the room. We are not to elbow ourselves in the middle of a crisis onto the last lifeboat. We are not to force ourselves on that, because our self is not as important as someone else's self. And that reflects in all kinds of aspects of Christian thought. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 5 would tell us that a husband's priority should be his wife. In fact, he should be willing to lay down his life for his wife, to protect her, to keep her. We are told in chapter 6 that children should be respectful of their parents, but that fathers should also treat their children with respect and treat them kindly. We are also told that children should take care of their elderly parents, that they should take care of them and care for them. That is part of honoring our parents. Jesus would indicate that all of these categories of people were important to him. He would bless the children. He would call them to himself when the disciples were pushing them away. He would show respect for women, even women who were not Jewish. He would honor people that were less than respectable in their culture, because Jesus prioritized them. And we are told that he prioritized us and our salvation above himself, because he was willing to die for us, that we might live eternally with him. That is the power of the gospel. It is the power of priority. And I fear that we live in a world where priorities are not driving us. The things that are really important do not drive us forward. We have placed ourselves on the thrones of our hearts. And as a result of that, we have lost our way in the area of our priorities. Solomon started out his life having an understanding of what was important, the right priorities. But as he grew older in life, he grew away from those, and they became confused and muddled. We are told by the chroniclers that Solomon married a large number of pagan princesses. As he expanded his kingdom, that was a way in which treaties were established between countries, was marriage. And so Solomon married a large number of women, and he began to worship their gods alongside of the Lord. And as a result of that, it says he was apostatized in his life. He turned away from God. In Ecclesiastes, we find Solomon toward the end of his life after this experience of apostasy, and there's arguments as to whether he came back to faith before his death. We don't know that. But we do know that in the book of Ecclesiastes, we see this man struggling with the concept of what is important, what is valuable. And he says, vanity of vanities, everything in life is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. No matter how much money I can accumulate, no matter how much I have brought to myself in chapter 2, everything is meaningless. It's useless. It's a chasing after the wind. I've not done anything of real value in my life. Verse 2 talks about the rest that God gives those who trust in him. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, the man Solomon writes almost a counter verse to what he wrote when he was a young man in verse 12 of chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes. He says, "Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep." He longs for those days when his priorities were square, when they were right. He will close the book of Ecclesiastes by saying, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember God. Remember what is important. And you sense that desire that he has to reach out to God again in his life, and that sense of hopelessness because he has depended so much on himself in life. I think about how terrible it is to live in a world where the priorities have been broken down, where we no longer are thinking about those things that are worth living for and worth dying for, but we are only thinking of ourselves. That would be a terrible world to live in. As a Christian, I am thankful for those things that have formed our sense of priorities. And I fear that as we lose our Christian faith in our culture, that we are losing the things that are really important in life. Thank you for listening today. God bless you. Hope to see you in church.